All right, everybody, welcome back to the A to Z Poll Podcast. My name is Zachary Siegel, and today we're going to be going over another iteration of the CFP Top 25. See what the committee has cooked up for us this week. If you like this kind of content, if you like college football, if you like any of this stuff, make sure to go find me on Twitter, on YouTube, leave a comment, all that good stuff. All right, so the CFP committee has given us an updated playoff ranking and how we think it will all be right now. Uh, as of last night, around 8:42 is when I got the notification for it. So that list reads as such: Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, Miami, Georgia, Tennessee, SMU, Indiana, Boise State, Clemson, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, Arizona State, Tulane, Iowa State, BYU, Texas A&M, Missouri, UNLV, Illinois, Kansas State, and finally Colorado. So, like we did last week, and like I'll do pretty much for the remainder of the season until bowl season at the very least, is I'm going to give us a my thoughts and opinions on the top 25. I have really this week four of them and one kind of separate thought, but five total things that we are going to talk about today. So if you have already seen this list and you are an astute listener, you would notice that as of right now, the highest rated Big 12 team is higher than the highest rated AAC team, which is different from last week. So in this Big 12 kind of versus the AAC battle for the 12th seed, if you wouldn't call it that, you have Arizona State after their win over BYU taking over Tulane spot, basically as the 12th seed in the playoffs, especially with Army getting absolutely annihilated by Notre Dame. Uh, it seems like this almost was a corrective piece, a corrective movement after having them one spot lower, um, or just simply one spot different the last week against Arizona State. Um, right, last week I talked about the fact that Arizona State beat Kansas State and Tulane lost to Kansas State, but it didn't make sense that Tulane was one pick above. This week, Arizona State cashes in another ranked win. I think, obviously, like I said, Arizona State should have been higher than Tulane last week, but here we are. It's corrected now, I guess, kind of no harm, no foul. But even with that being said, the rest of it in this kind of Big 12 versus AAC matchup is Army losing and dropping out with only one loss leaves room for, if Tulane were to uh, lose a game or two, that leaves room for, even if Arizona State doesn't win the Big 12, that leaves room for an Iowa State, a BYU, a Kansas State, or a Colorado, depending on who were to be a representative for the Big 12, to still step in and claim that 12th spot. And if Tulane were to lose to Memphis this weekend, that would mean a lot more. That would have a lot more impact. Um, we'll probably get into a little more of that later, but yes, that was my first point. The current Big 12 versus AAC battle that's happening in the that is currently happening in the college football rankings is leaning a little more towards the Big 12 at this point, especially after that Army loss. Next, number two. It really seems like they don't care about strength of schedule. Um, like, should Indiana, with a much easier schedule, still be 10th after getting put in their place by like Ohio State? Like, is are they still, are we saying that they're better than Alabama still? Like, I think we're now getting into this argument last year that we had with deserving teams versus better teams, right? Last year, Florida State deserved to be in the playoffs. That's no one's arguing that they went undefeated, they won the ACC, and they deserved to have a spot in the 14 playoff. But the committee determined that because of the Jordan Travis injury and because, you know, Alabama they just thought was a better team, they determined that Alabama got that spot because they were the better team. Whether they were right or not is almost moot at this point because it looks like they're doing the opposite of that this year. they're looking at Indiana and saying, "Oh, they only have one loss." I mean, hey, they deserve it. They should be up there. They should be in the playoff right now. But with Alabama at 13, and you seriously look at me and tell me that you think that Alabama is a worse team than Indiana, especially after seeing what Indiana finally did against a ranked opponent. This was their first ranked opponent this year. The best like standard we had against that was what they did against Nebraska versus what Ohio State did against Nebraska. And I think I said going into this week that if I would be really, really shocked if Indiana won. And not only did Indiana not win, but they really got put in their place. I also think this was just like a kind of a prop up game too for Ohio State, right? This gives Ohio State another top five win. Although I'm not really sure if I ever considered, I really was taking any real consideration into Indiana being that fifth seed. Um, I think that part of this again is just propping up the Big Ten and the SEC. I think that they do this like I said this last year. I've said this in years past. Said this last week. I do think that the committee just props up certain conferences by saying, "Oh, they've lost in their conference because their conference so good," as opposed to they are like the Big 12 and the ACC, where it's like, "Oh, they lost in their conference uh, because their conference is bad. There just aren't any elite teams in their conference." Um, moving on, uh, number three. So we had our first one, the Big 12 versus the AAC. Then we had the lack of strength of schedule, which we're gonna have another kind of bigger discussion about the strength of schedule thing as one of my later points. I just thought it would be necessary to separate it into two different points. But that's going to be number three, UNLV creeping into the top 25. Uh, Kind of what I said, making them kind of propping up another conference. I think they're using this to prop up the Mountain West. Now, is UNLV deserving of being in the top 25? Yes, I do think that. They are a 9-2 team. They played some very good football this year, and one of their only losses was to Boise State. That being said, now this puts Boise State in a much better position to where even if they lose and they lose in the Mountain West Championship to UNLV, it's just another ranked loss, and their two ranked losses would be UNLV, who they had already beaten earlier this year, and uh, Oregon. So I think that keeping putting UNLV in the top 25 just essentially secures the Mountain West's position in the college football playoff. Because even like I said, even if Boise State takes another loss, it would not surprise me if the committee put a two-loss Boise State team just because of their strength of schedule. Again, kind of this unfair, not really consistent way of thinking about it. But it would not surprise me if a two-loss Boise State team somehow crept into the playoffs, even with even just getting an at-large bid. I think they'd probably put some other teams in above them. Could still see them seeing. I could still see them put in a three-loss SEC team over Boise State, a two-loss Boise State. But I do think that this secures them a much higher chance of getting into the college football playoff. And that being said, even if they lose and UNLV wins, right, you're now giving UNLV a top 11 win and their conference championship. I have a hard time seeing them ranking them below Tulane after that list. I think they would just have them higher than Tulane. And seeing it, like, depending on how the Big 12 shakes out, that could be, again, just like you could throw the Mountain West into this mix of the 12th, 4th, and the 12th and 4th seed between the AAC, the Big 12, and the Mountain West. The Big 12 is really interesting because there's still like 8 teams that could play in the championship, depending on teams that lose this week. And with the Kansas State Iowa State game, it's Iowa State's essentially a win and in. Kansas State's a win with some other teams losing in, and Arizona State is also a win and in. So I mean, there's a lot of movement that can still happen, but I feel like you have to reward the winner in some capacity. Um, Number four, moving back to where we were initially. So moving back to not caring about strength of schedule is brings me right here to Notre Dame being number 5 in the country. I just don't get it. Like Notre Dame has a loss, right? They're a one-loss team. Great. who's looked at their schedule? Who has looked at Notre Dame's schedule? Because they have one ranked win this year, and it was against Texas A&M. All right, good win. It feels like a really good win, right? You want to talk about teams bouncing back uh, from early season losses because they're better. What teams get better than ones with first year head coaches? This was Mike Elko's very first game coaching the Aggies, and he lost to not taking anything away, but a very good Notre Dame team, who then turned around and lost to Northern Illinois. So if you want to give them Notre Dame the benefit of the doubt that they're a better team coming later in the season because they had a bad start to the season, I think you also have to take into consideration that Texas A&M was probably not a good team in the beginning of the season and are now a better team. And the fact that Texas A&M is still ranked 20th in the country, I think puts a lot of, propping up to this Notre Dame team. Kind of the thing that I've been saying now for two of my 4 points, now three of my 4 points, is that the committee uses their power to artificially prop up other teams. I think that's kind of what's happening with Notre Dame too. I think that Notre Dame has really no claim to be a top five team in this country. I'm going to list off to you real quick all the other teams that have one loss that are ranked lower than Notre Dame. Boise State lost to number one Oregon. That's their only loss of the season and are currently leading their conference. Miami lost to Georgia Tech, a Georgia Tech team that has clearly had a lot of success this season, more than normal, and a team that for some reason has Miami's number, but still a much better team than Northern Illinois. Indiana lost to number two Ohio State. SMU lost to number 19 BYU. I think the common trend here that we're seeing is that outside of Miami, all the other teams that have one loss are lost to ranked teams. That they lost to Northern Illinois, a team that is barely bowl eligible this year in what, the MAC? I don't even know. But the fact that you're putting Notre Dame number five when they have proven absolutely nothing is pretty ridiculous. Right now, if the playoffs were to start today with the standings that we have right now, the number one seed would be Oregon. Number two would be Texas. Number three would be Miami. Number four, Boise State. Number five would be Ohio State. Six, Penn State. Seven, Notre Dame. Eight, Georgia. Nine, Tennessee. 10, SMU. 11, Indiana. And 12, Arizona State. And you're telling me right now, you're going to tell me with a straight face, no joking aside, that Notre Dame is a better team than Miami, Georgia, Tennessee, or Alabama, or Ole Miss. You think that any of those teams, given the schedule, that really any team in the top 15, given the schedule that Notre Dame has had, wouldn't be undefeated right now? Even with one loss to Texas A&M, that's a better case to be a top five team than a loss to Northern Illinois. I get it. Things happen. You get better as the season goes on. That's totally fine. But you're just not giving the committee is just not giving the same due diligence to all the teams. They're for some reason being very selective and choosy with which teams they're willing to give that benefit to. I don't think we've ever had a top five team with this just embarrassing of a loss before, right? Like all the teams that I mentioned that have one loss that are better. Even Army. Right? Even Army, obviously it should be higher than Army because they beat Army, but Army's one loss is to a top five team. Even if you don't believe it's a top five team, a top 10 team, a top 15 team, even if it's a top 25 team, they're still a better team than Northern Illinois, right? Like Army, by this metric, should be right up there, but they got kicked out of the top 25 because although they're not a Power Five team, but they're not Notre Dame. And again, like I said, there's even some two or three loss teams with just overall better losses. Right? Tennessee lost to Tennessee lose. They lost to Arkansas and Georgia. Okay, that's what I was going to say. Georgia. They lost to Arkansas and Georgia. You're telling me that those two losses mean that they're worse than Notre Dame, a team that has their best win against a team that was in their very first game with a head coach and is worse losses than Northern Illinois. I could sit here and harp on this for days if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. And we're going to move on. But just think about why Notre Dame gets to be put in that top 25. Sorry, that top 5, but a team like SMU or literally any other one-loss team that's below them is lower. All right, so that's going to really wrap it up. Like I was saying, for my general thoughts on the top 25, it really just boils down to decisions that confuse me by the committee. And and just kind of like why are these teams like, and even you can even look at like Penn State, right? They do not have any good wins this season. They have wins against some good teams like Illinois, good win. Um, Outside of that, they lost to Ohio State. Like West Virginia was one of their best wins, but West Virginia isn't even having that good of a season. Um, but like I said, they're going to do what they want. I'm just going to talk about it. Now, my fifth thing that I just wanted to bring up. So again, not really like about the top 25, but I just want to talk about Florida keeping Billy Napier and why I do think that was a good idea. So looking on paper, right? Florida had a atrocious season. Whether or not it's atrocious by your standards or their standards, if you're a Florida fan, you're not happy with this season because in the SEC, you're not happy unless you win it. But I think that keeping Billy Napier, despite his shortcomings, just to keep a player like DJ Lagway is is a great move. I think that obviously his buyout is very expensive, and that played a huge role in it. But like I think, if you were to take someone like DJ Lagway and put him in almost any team, they're going to be better. If I Conversely, I think if DJ Lagway decided, oh, I'm going to go transfer, you fire Napier immediately. If he transfers, you fire immediately, restart. But if DJ Lagway is going to stick with you because you have Billy Napier, that's a reason enough to keep Billy Napier at least until Lagway leaves. And I think you're going to see a lot of success. I told somebody last week. I said if in the Ole Miss Florida game, I said if Florida is starting DJ Lagway, pick Florida. If they're not, you could take Ole Miss. Um, DJ Lagway, in my opinion, is one of the most just physically talented and best decision making quarterbacks in the country, and probably my way too early pick for the Heisman 2025 race. Um, but as of now, that is pretty much where I'm going to leave this off with. Again, if you like this kind of talent, if you made it this far in the show, please like and subscribe. Add a comment. Tell me what you think. What things I missed. What things you noticed. What do you like to see me talk about next time? Go out there, watch some football, and I hope your team wins.